Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule at the defense rests.
All right. Good morning, y'all. How are we? Did we all have a good rest? How is your Tuesday morning? Tuesday? Well, it's the 9th of July here. I'm tipping the 8th where you are. Maybe, if you're in America. Welcome to the Defense Stress. If it's your first time here, suffering your jocks. If you've been here before, then you know what you're in for. So suffering your jocks. Today we are covering another archive trial that I discovered over the weekend. Good morning, Tricia. And I'll tell you now, it's a trigger warning for it involves minors and SA. So I heard you coming. I heard you knocking on the door. And I didn't beat you today. Oh, you're a dag. Oh dear. There is not enough. I've come to the conclusion. There is not enough time in my day for me to do everything that I need to. Oh, hello. Oh, you want some dinner, don't you? Yeah, well, you didn't come home at dinner time, did you? No. And now you come just as I go live, of course. You're going to have to wait, aren't you? No, he's going to walk all over my fucking keyboard just like that. Turd. Good morning, Christine. How are you? You just might miss my Destructo kitty. Oh, my brain's already fried. I've been going through bloody all the paperwork from my hearing on Friday, so I'm nearly there. I'll get there. Ace holes, that's all I can say. Ace holes. So today is the Jeffrey Curley murder. So the murder was an abduction, murder, grooming, the whole works. Necrophilia. Yeah. Back in 1997, and it was in October, the 1st of October, I think. Yes, in 1997, in East Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Jeffrey Curley was 10 years old. Now, his parents weren't particularly wealthy, but East Cambridge was not really a high crime area. And different sources I've read. Hello, my sweet chicks. Good morning. Welcome. You haven't missed anything. We have just started. I'll start from the scratch. So, 1st of October in 1997, young Jeffrey Curley, 10 years old, lives in East Cambridge, Massachusetts. His mum and dad both work. His dad's a firefighter. He wants to be a firefighter when he gets older, and often accompanies his dad down to the fire station and climbs on all the engines. He desperately wanted a new bike, and his parents weren't wealthy. They were okay, but they both had to work, so there wasn't a great deal of supervision. He often was looked after by his grandmother, and he pretty much came and went as he pleased. He had 2 older brothers who they were quite older than him, and so he was almost left to his own devices. So he got involved with a 20-year-old called Salvatore Sicari. And they used to hang around together. The family knew him. They knew of him. But it was through him that Jeffrey was introduced to Charles Janes. And Charles Janes, I think, was 21 at the time and a known sex offender. And get off my goddamn... Oh, fucking cat. The cat turned my camera off. Yeah, you. Fuck. Yep. Where was I? So, yes, he was introduced to Charles Janes. And Charles Janes was also a member of what's called NAMBLA. Now, that's an acronym for Native American Man-Boy Love Association or something. It's something revolting. And yeah, something revolting like that anyway. Don't you come back and walk over here. Hey, fucker. You turd. Oh, fuck. It's not a runway. Yes, this particular establishment was called NAMBLA. And it wasn't far away. Like, there was a whole... It was a whole group thing, like... it's hard to explain. And you know what my brain's like this time of fucking night. It don't work. So I will leave that to the video to explain because I have drawn a blank on that one. So I'm useless. So we'll we'll have a look at what... Now, I've looked at a few different explanations of the story, and this was the most succinct and good one I could find. So shout out to... who did I say? Who have I pinned at the top of the state, I think? The Misery Machine. Now, I had a look at their site. They've got 464,000 subscribers, right? They have 400 videos. I've got over 1,000 videos. The fuck, man? The fuck? All right. I'll stop looking now. Okie dokie. Here we go. Yeah. That's really good channel, actually. Really good.
John Curley was born on June 9th, 1987, and grew up on Hampshire Street in East Cambridge, Massachusetts, just outside of the city of Boston. He was the youngest of 3 children born to Robert and Barbara Curley, flanked by his protective older brothers, Sean and Bobby. At the time of our story, Jeffrey was 10 years old. Robert and Barbara had just divorced, and all 3 of the sons lived with their mother on Hampshire Street. Robert lived in a nearby condo. East Cambridge is home to many working-class Irish and Portuguese families, and the Curley family was on the lower income side of the spectrum. Jeffrey played basketball, hockey, and baseball in the neighborhood.
And I'm just going to blame it on my new medication, okay? So don't blame me.
Was well liked by everyone who knew him. He'd hang out with the other kids and sometimes with his older brothers at the Gore Street ice rink or Donnelly Field by the school where he played baseball. Sometimes Jeffrey stayed out late, but nobody ever worried that much. He was what one would refer to as a latchkey kid. Now, Barbara worked full-time and his older brothers were much older. In the 90s and prior, none of this would have been seen as unusual. But it wasn't just sports that had caught his fancy. A typical scene from his life would include him zipping down the lanes on his bike, popping...
The other thing I wanted to mention about this trial, FYI, it was prosecuted prosecuted by none other than David Yanetti in the flesh. Both of them.
Wheelies with an echo of laughter trailing behind him. Like many his age, he was a very innocent little boy and was quite trusting of others, even if he did get into some harmless mischief sometimes. Like many boys growing up in the Boston area, Jeffrey wanted to be a fireman when he grew up. This aspiration often found him at the local fire station where his father worked. He would spend hours observing the fire trucks. Their sirens and flashing lights filled his young heart with awe and fascination. He'd clamber over the trucks as his father worked on them, or he'd sit at the dispatch desk waiting for alarms and the clomping of firemen's boots down the wooden stairs. Sometimes, if the call wasn't too far away, he'd catch up with the trucks on his bike and watch his dad work the pressure controls.
However, Jeffrey's tendency to hang out with an older crowd led him to some unsavory characters. His East Cambridge neighborhood was home to a man named Salvatore SICARI, a mechanic from the Inman Square section of Cambridge. Now, 21-year-old Salvatore had a very unsettling relationship with then 22-year-old Charles James, who was a car detailer who had previously been his co-worker at a dealership. Charles and Salvatore both had criminal records. Charles was wanted on 75 outstanding warrants in 18 Massachusetts courts. For some reason, no one seemed to be looking for him. Salvatore had previous arrests for selling drugs in a school zone and for the assault and battery of a woman. Charles lived in Brockton, Massachusetts, but had an apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire under the pseudonym Anthony Scasia. These two places are a bit of a hike from one another, and keeping both of these homes with his current career doesn't make logistical sense on paper, but I'm sure it had something to do with those 75 outstanding warrants. But aside from his strange living arrangement, Charles was harboring a more sinister...
Apparently, one of the apartments, when they arrested him and went to search his apartment, it was decorated like a 9-year-old's bedroom, basically. Yes, Yanetti's prosecutor. Yes. Yeah. Get to see him in action. Kind of. I'll explain later.
secret. He was a child predator. The duo had been seen in the months leading up to Jeffrey's disappearance, frequenting the neighborhood in Charles' 1983 Cadillac Fleetwood. Some sources indicate it was a Seville.
You probably missed it before, Simi, but trigger warning, okay? Mine is an SA.
It was through Salvatore that Charles was introduced to Jeffrey. Together, they planned to lure Jeffrey into their sinister plot. Now, Charles was known to be a member of the North American Man-Boy Love Association,
There you go.
or what it's more commonly known by, NAMBLA. For those unfamiliar, this is a child predator organization which advocates for the abolition of age of consent laws. You might remember this organization from the South Park episode, Cartman Joins NAMBLA. It's a very common misconception that South Park made up this organization, but unfortunately, it is very real.
Despite the
After we've done this, I've actually got a podcast of an FBI agent who infiltrated NAMBLA and how he got in there and what he saw and what he discovered.
disturbing circumstances that surrounded him, Jeffrey continued his daily routine, his innocence
checking.
untouched by the evils that lurked nearby. However, the canvas of this ideal childhood was marred by an incident on October 1st, 1997. On this seemingly ordinary day, Jeffrey made a routine visit to his grandmother. As he stepped out, he cheerfully promised her that he would be back in about 10 minutes. Unbeknownst to everyone, this promise marked the end of normalcy for the Curley family, and for his poor Nana, who was the last person to see him alive. The lively 10-year-old freckle-faced boy who held dreams of dousing fires and saving lives never returned. Jeffrey John Curley, a beacon of life and unbridled potential, vanished that day, leaving behind a wake of questions and despair. Soon, the Cambridge police began their frantic search for the missing boy.
Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I was actually thinking 1997. I'd just had, I think, my second miscarriage, and was about to fall pregnant with Jamison because I had her in November 98. Sorry, sweetheart. Much love.
Boy. But as hours turned into days, hope began to dwindle. With the arrival of news crews, the Curley family's worst fears were broadcast to the world. Their pleas for Jeffrey's safe return echoed throughout the city, a tragic reminder of the boy who was now missing.
As the investigation progressed, Salvatore, being the last known person to have seen Jeffrey, became a focus of attention. Like many criminals, Salvatore attempted to insert himself into the investigation by making voluntary statements to police, as well as assisting with search efforts for the missing boy.
Now,
On October 3rd, 1997, Sergeant...
it later comes out, you know how they always say, don't self-snitch. No self-snitching. Well, they actually had absolutely no evidence whatsoever to tie Salvatore SICARI to this crime, but he admitted absolutely everything. That's the only reason he ever got prosecuted, and he actually he didn't commit the crime. He participated, but he wasn't the main perpetrator, and he got more of a sentence than the actual perpetrator is because he opened his mouth.
Sergeant Patrick Nagel of the Cambridge Police Department contacted Salvatore and asked him to come to the police station for further discussion, one of many over the past few days. Once at the station, Salvatore reiterated his previous conversations with Sergeant Nagel. He spoke about his relationship with Charles, whom he'd met 2 years earlier in
Funny how there's a Nagel in here
He
too.
claimed to have warned both Charles and Jeffrey about their inappropriate friendship given their significant age difference. After investigators found physical evidence that linked them to Jeffrey, including a bag of quicklime and NAMBLA literature,
That was all
Salvatore
to do with,
confessed. He was arrested, after which he stated, "Lock me up, I'm guilty." Charles Janes later was apprehended at his workplace, a Honda dealership in Newton, Massachusetts.
The Curley family's nightmare escalated when, 3 days after Jeffrey's disappearance, the police arrived with a priest. They had obtained a confession. Jeffrey had been killed, and the suspects were none other than Salvatore SICARI and Charles Janes. The knowledge of their son's fate and the horrifying details of his death sent the Curley family into a whirlwind of grief and disbelief. An impromptu shrine in memory of Jeffrey appeared outside their home, where community members...
Hang on, I've got a picture of that. They actually... That's Jeffrey's father. That's the shrine there. The community actually tried to reinstate the death penalty in this state over this case.
Left flowers, baseballs, and stuffed toys. Amid this heartbreaking spectacle, a local woman started a petition to reinstate the death penalty. As the Curley family grappled with their grief, they were forced to watch their nightmare play out on television, a chilling testament to the evil that lurked in their own neighborhood.
Salvatore's confession detailed a horrific series of events. He and Charles lured Jeffrey under the guise of purchasing a bicycle for him, as his had previously been stolen. They also planned to give him $50. Between 3 and 3:30 p.m. on October 1st, they convinced Jeffrey to accompany them, stopping at a gas station where Charles dampened a rag with gasoline. He then attempted to essay Jeffrey in the vehicle. When Jeffrey...
So, basically, they'd groomed him for 2 weeks prior, and Charles wanted to have his way with Jeffrey. Jeffrey had no idea. They went to the petrol station, and Charles, as he said, got the rag of gasoline. And then when he attempted to assault him in the back of the car and Jeffrey refused, that's when he got nasty.
Resisted, Charles suffocated him with the gasoline-soaked rag. It was a brutal struggle, with 85-pound Jeffrey resisting the 250-pound Charles for over 20 minutes. until he sadly succumbed to suffocation from the gasoline-soaked rag jammed into his mouth. According to Salvatore, Charles killed Jeffrey because, in his words, he thought he was going to get a bike and $50 for nothing. During this entire...
That gasoline rag basically apparently blistered his entire face, mouth, throat, lungs, the whole lot.
Struggle. Salvatore managed to evade a police cruiser that was in the vicinity during the attack.
During his ordeal, Jeffrey suffered burn marks on his forehead, eye, cheek, chin, and neck as a result of the gasoline. According to the medical examiner that later completed Jeffrey's autopsy, the toxic fumes induced a cardiac arrhythmia, worsening fluid buildup in the lungs and instilling a sensation of drowning. Afterward, Jeffrey's lifeless body was placed in the trunk, and the pair drove to the Honda Village, a dealership in Newton.
So Charles, this is what a sociopath this bastard is. He kills Jeffrey, dumps him in the trunk, and then gets Salvatore to drive him to work. He's got to go to work. He's got to work. You know, got to work. You just wait here. I'll be with you when I'm done. Yeah?
Massachusetts. There, they worked on a car for a few hours while Jeffrey lay dead in the Cadillac. Later that afternoon, around 4:45 p.m., their car was spotted at an NHD hardware store parking lot in Newton. Only Salvatore and Charles were visible within the vehicle. There was no sign of Jeffrey.
The pair then purchased quicklime and concrete from a Home Depot in Somerville, Massachusetts, a large plastic storage tub from a Bradley's department store in Watertown, Massachusetts, as well as alcohol before headed to Charles' apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire. This whole trip from East Cambridge to Manchester is over 2 hours of driving alone, according to Google Maps, not taking into account the traffic.
So by that stage, Jeffrey would have been deceased by over 6 hours, yeah? So rigor would have set in, yeah?
That is pretty bad in Eastern Mass. At the apartment, the pair wrapped Jeffrey's body in a blue plastic tarp and brought him inside.
What came next was absolutely horrific. Charles disrobed the young boy, taking a button and a label from his trousers as keepsakes. The 22-year-old laid the boy's body on top of a plastic bag on the kitchen floor and proceeded to violate him with a Coors Light bottle before flipping him over and continuing to perform lewd acts that involved his hands, mouth, and feet.
The rest.
Despite Charles's insistence, Salvatore refused to engage in the post-mortem essay of Jeffrey.
At around 2:30 a.m., the pair mixed the cement in the plastic tub, essentially entombed Jeffrey's body inside it. They applied quicklime to Jeffrey's eyes, mouth, and cheeks. Now, some viewers might think we are confusing quicklime for lye, but according to all official documents, it was confirmed that this was indeed quicklime. The two then sealed the container with duct tape and then proceeded to South Berwick, Maine, where they threw the container into the Great Works River around 5 a.m. Displaying no apparent guilt or remorse, they proceeded to enjoy a breakfast of coffee and pastries afterwards. Authorities later found the container in the anticipated location within Maine's Great Works River, matching descriptions provided by Salvatore. Police divers documented the container's appearance before its extraction, but they deferred opening it until it reached the state's medical examiner's office in Augusta, Maine, approximately 90 miles northeast. The container was slated for processing with an autopsy scheduled for the following morning.
During their trials, Charles's friend William Pellegrini Jr. testified that Charles told him that he was interested in a red-haired Cambridge boy. Apparently, he carried around a picture taken in a mall photo booth of Jeffrey sitting on his lap. According to William, quote, he discussed it very freely. All of his friends knew that he was a pedo, end quote. Although prosecutors asked Pellegrini not to discuss the case with reporters, his mother Ronnie had a few things to share. She said Charles came out as a child predator in a meeting in Brockton, which her son also attended. She said, quote, I know for a fact there were adults, psychologists there. If anyone was going to say something to authorities, they should have, end quote. Tashika Ellis, a neighbor of Salvatore's, testified that in the month before Jeffrey's death, she questioned Jeffrey about why he hung around with the two men. She said, quote, "He was smart with me, told me to mind my business. Then he said he had to do something for Charles because he was going to get a bike," end quote.
On November 13th, 1998, after 4 grueling days of deliberations, the Middlesex Superior Court jury found
he went to trial when I just had Jamison. I had her on the 6th.
Salvatore guilty of first-degree homicide and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. According to the website VineLink, which serves as an inmate locator, Salvatore is still listed within the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, but he's currently being housed in Florida. In December of the same year, following a separate trial and 9 days of deliberations, Charles Janes was found guilty of second-degree homicide and kidnapping. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. He's currently being held at the Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Given that Charles was the one who killed Jeffrey and performed these unspeakable acts on him post-mortem, you might be confused as to why Charles only got second-degree homicide and Salvatore got first. Well, Salvatore confessed to everything that happened, but Charles refused to talk to police and quickly lawyered up. Despite Salvatore's confession, there simply was not enough evidence to convict Charles of first-degree homicide. But because Salvatore incriminated himself, they were able to convict him with first-degree homicide despite not being the one to kill or violate Jeffrey. Throughout the legal process, Salvatore attempted to suppress incriminating statements he made to Cambridge police about evidence regarding bodily fluids found at the murder scene. These motions were denied, leaving Salvatore to appeal his convictions of kidnapping and first-degree homicide, arguing that his rights were violated. Despite his appeals, his convictions remained intact, leaving Salvatore to serve his sentence without the hope of ever getting parole.
In the year 2000, Barbara and Robert Curley filed a lawsuit against NAMBLA in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts, stating that the organization had incited men who kidnapped and murdered their young son. They sought $200 million in damages. The American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts represented NAMBLA because of, in their words, the issue of censorship of unpopular speech about sexuality. You heard this correctly. The ACLU of Massachusetts took it upon themselves to defend a bunch of child predators from a grieving family whose son was murdered. The ACLU succeeded in getting the suit dismissed based on the specific legal issue that NAMBLA is organized as an association, not a corporation.
Yeah.
The Curleys continued their suit against individual members of NAMBLA and its steering committee members. They finally dropped the lawsuit in 2008 because the court ruled that their only witness to incitement was not competent to testify. In 2012, Charles Janes requested a name change in court, aligning with his newfound alleged Wiccan beliefs. The name he chose was Manasseh Invictus Auric Thutmose V. That request was denied, which he later appealed. The appeals court found that Charles had not shown that changing his name is an important component of the Wiccan religion, and that without the change, he would be limited in exercising it. The Curley family also attended these hearings, where they had words for the judge. Now, according to Robert, quote, "He's a master at this. The things that make Charles Janes so dangerous are the well-spoken words he had today, the nice, soft demeanor he has today. But I tell you..."
Tommy, do you know anything about what that name means? By any chance? I'll go back and repeat it.
In court, aligning with his newfound alleged Wiccan beliefs. The name he chose was Manasseh Invictus Auric Thutmose V.
Manasseh Invictus Auric Thutmose V. Yeah, but does that name have any meaning in the faith? By your knowledge, is there any relevance to why would he choose that name? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool.
That request was denied, which he later appealed. The appeals court found that Charles had not shown that changing his name is an important component of the Wiccan religion, and that without the change, he would be limited in exercising it. The Curley family also attended these hearings, where they had words for the judge. Now, according to Robert, quote, "He's a master at this. The things that make Charles James so dangerous are the well-spoken words he had today, the nice, soft demeanor he has today. But I tell you, Charles James is the face of evil, pure evil, and that's what makes him so dangerous," end quote.
During one parole hearing in 2020, Charles surprisingly admitted guilt. He said, quote, "I'm here to take responsibility for my murder of Jeffrey Curley. The Department of Correction does not make it easy for an inmate when he wants to acknowledge that he's guilty of the crime that he's been convicted of. And the parole board is the only way. I have to be accountable for my actions," end quote. However, his attempts at accountability were met with skepticism by the parole board due to his reported threatening behavior behind bars and refusal to attend offender programs. Jeffrey's family, who attended the hearing, saw through Charles's performance. Jeffrey's father, Robert, labeled him as a con man, stating, "Just watching him here today, it's almost comical. He can twist things. He can change things to fit his own agenda." Barbara told the parole board that her 2 grown sons can't trust people around their children because of what happened to their brother. She asked the board to delay giving Charles another hearing for 5 years or more due to the hardship of the process. She said, quote, "I will never have another happy kid. My heart is broken. I will be haunted and devastated for the rest of my life," end quote. According to Jeffrey's brother Sean, he doesn't belong out of his cell. He's a monster. He belongs in jail until the day he dies. Thankfully, the parole board has thus far agreed with the family. At Charles's parole hearing in 2021, the Curley family voiced their opposition to his release. The emotional turmoil was palpable as they described the everlasting pain inflicted by the loss of their son. "He took away a piece of my heart. He took my little man. He changed all our lives forever that day," lamented Barbara, with Robert stating, "The real Charles James is the devil. That's the face of the devil right there." Again, the parole board agreed that Charles James should remain locked up. Following the brutal loss of his 10-year-old son, Jeffrey, Robert dedicated himself to a crusade for the reinstatement of capital punishment in Massachusetts. He believed that the death penalty could serve as a deterrent to such horrific crimes. However, over time, Robert's perspective on the justice system shifted. The man he deemed less culpable for Jeffrey's death had received a harsher sentence, leading Robert to question the fairness and reliability of capital punishment verdicts. After all, Salvatore was held without bail pre-trial, whereas Charles was granted $100,000 cash bail. This is all because Salvatore was honest and confessed to what happened, whereas Charles remained silent and let his legal team do the heavy lifting. In addition, Robert's connection with bereaved parents who opposed the death penalty prompted him to reevaluate his position.
Yeah, did a full 180.
According to Robert, quote, "When Jeffrey was murdered, I wanted the men who killed him dead. I led the fight to reinstate the death penalty in Massachusetts in 1997. But time passes and you start to see things differently. I started to see that there were people like me who had suffered the same loss that I had who were opposed to the death penalty. And it kind of made me take a step back and take a look at the death penalty itself. I learned more about the death penalty and some of the problems with it, and I changed my mind," end quote.
Healing from the loss of his son proved to be a challenging journey for Robert. He said, quote, "Time moves on and you keep plugging away," end quote, implying that the pain of losing his youngest son never truly faded.
No.
He sought solace in advocacy, dedicating himself to speaking at essay prevention programs. These efforts, while helpful, could never quite assuage the pain of Jeffrey's absence. John Curley, who is Jeffrey's uncle, still finds it challenging to articulate his grief. Yet, he is adamant about preserving Jeffrey's memory. Through the efforts of the Curley family and their community, Jeffrey's memory lives on. The city now hosts an annual road race and Little League baseball tournament in his name, raising scholarship funds and keeping his spirit alive. As for Barbara, she painted a vivid picture of her youngest son, a curious and mischievous boy, always vibrant and full of life. Losing Jeffrey was a devastating experience that continues to haunt her. His absence has left a void in her life that can never be filled. If you're interested in learning more about Jeffrey's story, please check out the book The Ride by Brian McQuarrie. It's quite detailed and goes into in-depth analysis of the aftermath of the case.
Jeffrey John Curley was laid to rest at the Cambridge Cemetery beneath a black headstone with etchings of Jesus and shamrocks, as well as his Little League picture. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Robin Jones, a spokeswoman for the Massachusetts Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. We feel that her words are very important in not only Jeffrey's case, but in all cases involving our most vulnerable. She said, quote, "I realize people don't want to get involved, but if something seems weird or fishy, they have to ask what's going on and report it to authorities. The general public has a responsibility to take care of kids," end quote.
There you go. So, they don't actually have. Oh, we'll play that one after.
But with an undercover.
Stop. This is what I want to do. Over here. Yeah, there was no video of the trial that I could find. But in saying that, because of the type of case it was and how much attention it generated or garnered in 1997, and yeah, everything that went along with it, David Yanetti, because he was the prosecutor and he was successful in prosecuting successfully both of those trials, his closing arguments were nominated for some award over there. So they actually have a video of him. He had to go to some presentation and reenact his closing arguments. So we'll have a look at hello. How you doing? No worries, not at all. You don't have to chat if you don't want to. Yeah, so he reenacts his prosecution, and I did have to giggle. It is quite animated. It's quite funny, but where am I? Share this page. Come on, share. And it's weird. Look at him. He's so young. So young. Still hot, hot as fuck, though. Mr. Yanetti.
Looking for an attorney to actually be able to see that attorney in a courtroom-like setting, doing what the attorney is ultimately going to do for the client. In my case, I was asked in late 2008 by Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly to participate in an event that's called the Battle of the Lawyers, which is sort of a forum for attorneys to recreate famous or infamous closing arguments that they've done over the course of their careers. And it's a competition, it's for charity, and I was honored to be selected to participate. In 2008, I recreated a closing argument that I had done back in 1998 when I was a prosecutor, the murder of a 10-year-old little boy in Cambridge, a case I prosecuted way back when. So the footage that you're about to see is my recreated closing argument, again, done 10 years later. And also, of course, it's a prosecution closing because back then I was a prosecutor. But what my clients need to know is that I bring the same passion, the same intensity, the same emotion and preparation to my cases as a criminal defense attorney. And in fact, this is me in 2008 when I am a criminal defense attorney. So you can get some sort of sense as to how I am in a courtroom.
On the afternoon of October 1st, 1997, 10-year-old Jeffrey Curley told his grandmother, "I have to do something. I'll be back in a little while." His grandmother would be the last one to see him alive. Within the next few days, the investigation into Curley's disappearance turned towards two men, Salvatore SICARI, who was Curley's neighbor,
Mhm.
and a man named Charles Janes. SICARI eventually confessed to a role in Curley's murder.
Do you
It was a
think that
lurid
was an
tale
accident,
of the young
Adam?
boy being molested before he was killed. SICARI pleaded not guilty to charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder. He maintained that it was Janes, a self-admitted pedophile, who killed Curley.
You fucking
SICARI claimed
betcha.
he in no way cooperated with Janes or shared any intent. But Prosecutor David Yanetti argued that it didn't matter which man physically performed the kidnapping and the murder, even if it was Janes who actually kidnapped and murdered Curley, Yanetti stressed. SICARI was equally culpable because he intended to commit the crimes and assisted Janes in carrying them out.
Can you imagine sitting
We'll
in
now
the
hear
front
David
of that fucking car for 20 minutes whilst that asshole suffocated a 10-year-old and did nothing? Suck it.
Yanetti's closing. Counselor,
I think
closing
I've got
argument,
one
please.
of those. I believe I do.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the
Somewhere.
court. Ladies and gentlemen, over the course of the last 2 weeks, you've heard from 60 witnesses, over 200 exhibits. You've listened to a lot of testimony, much of it technical, all of it important. But I suggest to you, despite the length of this trial and the number of witnesses and the number of exhibits, this is a very simple case. When you boil it down, this case comes down to the fact that 10-year-old Jeffrey Curley left Cambridge.
Oh, sorry, I could only go up to 360p.
And he never came home.
No high def on this.
He never came home because two men killed him. And they killed him because he would not do what they wanted
You
him
missed the start. You need to go back to the start and have a listen. It's horrendous. Absolutely fucking horrendous.
to do. Jeffrey Curley said no. Jeffrey Curley resisted. Jeffrey Curley fought. And for that, he had to die.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're here today. That's what this case is about. Now, there are a couple of ways.
I just found it really, really interesting watching him as a prosecutor than a defense attorney. That's all.
to look at this case, really. 12 of you will do that when you retire to that jury room and you evaluate the evidence and you come to a true and just verdict in this case. But I suggest to you, there are really two ways to look at this case. You can either believe the words of Salvatore SICARI in his final version of a statement that he gave to the police after 18 hours of lies. You can either believe his statement or you could disbelieve the words of Salvatore SICARI. But I suggest to you, whether you believe his final version of a statement to the police or whether you disbelieve it, he is guilty of murder in the first degree. Let's look at his statement. Let's take his words at face value and let's assume that he's telling us the truth.
So he did this closing 10 years prior to this, and he's reciting it word for word.
If that's true, then Salvatore SICARI is guilty of murder in the first degree as a joint venturer. Now, Justice Cowan will instruct you on the law of joint venture, and I suggest to you all three elements are present in this case. The first element being present at the scene of a crime, that's a no-brainer. Salvatore SICARI tells the police, trying to shift blame away from himself and onto his friend, Charles Janes, he still tells the police he was present for this murder. The second element, sharing the intent for the crime. Well, he doesn't use those words. He doesn't say, I shared the intent for the crime. But he tells you what he did that day, and that tells you that he indeed did share the intent for the crime. Do you recall his words? He told the police that when he showed up in the neighborhood in Charles Jane's car, as they had been doing for months, as they were spending time with this boy and befriending him and seducing him, taking him to restaurants and buying him toys and promising him a bike and so forth and so on. This day, however, when they showed up in that neighborhood and they see Jeffrey Curley leaving his grandmother's house, running to their car to be with his two pals, Salvatore SICARI tells the police that he ducked down in the car. He ducked down. He didn't want anybody to see him. Now, if this were an innocent excursion, like all the others, if he had no idea what was to happen later that day, why is he ducking down? For what reason? It's obvious, isn't it?
I told you it was
He's
animated.
telling the police, he's telling you, he knew exactly what was going to happen that day. This was the big day where the seduction was going to pay off. And he wasn't going to let anybody see him in that car. He knew what was going to happen. He shared the intent for that crime, and that second element of joint venture is satisfied. And the third element of joint venture, again, if you believe his words, participation in the crime, well, do you recall what Salvatore SICARI told the police? Again, in this final version, where he's putting himself in the best light possible. He said that when Charles James was dragging this poor boy into the back seat of that car, what did he do? Did he call the police? Oh my God, there's this 300-pound monster dragging a boy in the back seat of the car. No. Did he yell for help? Please, anyone, stop this man. No. Did he go up to Charlie, his pal, and say, hey, what are you doing? This isn't what we talked about. What are you, get off him. No. Did he grab him and throw him off him and say, stop? No. Did he do nothing?
Yes.
As his attorney argues today, was he merely present while the murder was taking place? No. He told the police that he quickly ran around the car and closed all the car doors and then got in the driver's seat and took off so that Charlie wouldn't get caught. And then as they're driving along the road, he looks in his rearview mirror and he thinks he sees the boy's arm go up in a struggle, and he thinks he sees a cruiser behind him. He punches the gas to get out of there so that Charlie could finish the job. If you believe Salvatore SICARI's own words, he is guilty of murder in the first degree by joint venture. But folks, you are not required to believe his words. You are entitled to reject those words, and you are entitled to look at the evidence in this case for the answers that you will need. The evidence in this case tells you something quite different, does it not? It took Salvatore SICARI 18 hours to come up with this final version of events, putting himself in the best light possible, shifting blame to the 300-pound monster, according to his attorney. He didn't call him that.
It was a big case, apparently, back in its day.
Friend. But it didn't take Salvatore SICARI 18 hours to tell his girlfriend what had happened. He and James
She testified
went to
against
that
him.
Home Depot and they bought the concrete and the lime and the Rubbermaid container, everything they would need to dispose of this poor 10-year-old boy's body. And after they
You know what lime does, don't
Jeffrey's
you?
lifeless body into that container and filled it with concrete and took it to the Great Works River and pushed it over the bridge, and it splashed in the river, and Jeffrey Curley's body sank to the bottom of that river. SICARI's on the phone to his girlfriend. He doesn't tell her everything, but he tells her all you need to know.
Yep.
I just hurt somebody really bad. I just hurt somebody really bad. What else do you need to know? The evidence in this case tells you what Salvatore SICARI did. I suggest to you on October 1st of 1997, this was indeed a big day for Salvatore SICARI and Charles James. This was the day when the seduction was going to pay off. All of the dinners and the toys, we're going to buy him a bike today. And then we're going to have our way with him. But something went wrong. something they didn't count on.
He fought back.
This 10-year-old boy said no. He refused. He fought with every ounce of energy that his 10-year-old body could muster. He fought them, and for that, he had to die. They decided to kill him. They decided it. And then they acted upon that decision by forcing him to inhale gasoline
hang on a
vapors
second.
from a gasoline.
How come they couldn't charge Charles James with first degree? Because he went into that gas station and deliberately covered that rag with gasoline, knowing full well what he was going to do with it. That's intent. Is it not? Because that's what he used to suffocate him with. Why else would you cover a rag and gasoline? The fuck?
Soaked rag. That, ladies and gentlemen, is premeditation. Making the decision.
I didn't actually watch all of this.
Acting upon the decision. And that's what Salvatore SICARI did. That is what those two men did.
Oh, was it Salvatore that did that?
Is one theory of first-degree murder, and it is present in this case. But it is not the only one.
I thought it was Charles.
Judge Cowan will instruct you that there is another theory called extreme atrocity or extreme cruelty. You will make this decision. When you do, realize that you are the conscience of this community. You decide whether their behavior was extremely atrocious or extremely cruel. And to do this, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, it is uncomfortable. Nobody wants to think about this, but you must. You must think about the way that Jeffrey Curley died. This was a big day for Jeffrey Curley as well. Imagine his horror when his friend Charlie and Sal are pulling him into the back seat of that vehicle. It is uncomfortable, but you must look at those autopsy photos. And again, I apologize for introducing those.
Oh, can you imagine?
Nobody should have to look at those photos. It is unnatural, but you must, because that is your job. You saw in those autopsy photos that Jeffrey Curley had red burn marks on his forehead, his eye, his cheek, his chin, his neck. What does that tell you? That tells you exactly what Jeffrey Curley did. And it tells you the fight that this 10-year-old boy put up against these two men. They tried to smother him with that gasoline-soaked rag. And Jeffrey Curley fought, and they couldn't get it on his nose and his mouth. And he was going on his eye and his forehead and his chin and his cheek and his neck. Imagine the horror that he's feeling, the betrayal, the pain, the burns. But the worst was yet to come, because it was inevitable that they would overpower him, and overpower him they did. They got that rag over his nose and his mouth. And you heard the testimony of the medical examiner. That would have immediately caused him problems in breathing.
I think they gaff taped it to
and
his
Jeffrey
face.
Curley would have panicked. Panicked. Why are Charlie and Sal doing this to me? My God, it hurts. And then the gas would have been transported to his heart. And it would have caused an irregular beating in his heart. And he would have known it, and he would have felt it. And he would have panicked even more. Ultimately, the arrhythmia in his heart, according to the medical examiner, would have worsened the fluid in his lungs, and it would have felt to Jeffrey Curley as if he were drowning. He did all he could, but it was inevitable, and Jeffrey Curley died. That was the manner in which he died. And when you consider whether he died in an extremely atrocious or extremely cruel manner, you may consider Salvatore Sicari and Charles Jane's indifference to his suffering. You saw them on that Home Depot video. They may as well have been at Stop and Shop, buying a Rubbermaid container with concrete and lime. And you know something else, because the receipt was found by the police in the excellent investigation they did of this case. That receipt told you everything you needed to know about Salvatore Sicari's feelings toward this 10-year-old boy as he lay in the trunk of their vehicle. That receipt reflected that they stopped at that Oscar drug and they purchased 2 cigars for the ride.
Oh,
to
you
Jane's
fucking
apartment
for real?
to smoke along the way while the lifeless body of
Shame that
Jeffrey
the fucking
Curley.
gas wasn't still in their
lies in their
hands. They
trunk.
blew up their hands. Arseholes.
Ladies and gentlemen, both theories of first-degree murder are present in this case. The evidence screams extreme atrocity or extreme cruelty at you. I ask you to find Mr. Sicari guilty of murder in the first degree
And they did.
and nothing less.
So yes, he got life without parole, and as I said, Jane's got life, but he's hang on. He was up for parole, I think, in 2000, and denied. And I think he was up a second time, and they denied him as well. Oh, hello! Cut it off with a rusty serrated knife, and then no antibiotics, no nothing. Just let it rot. I doubt. I think there was something put in place with the parole board. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, very, very, very unlikely. So this is it's a podcast that I found really interesting because exactly. I reckon they did. Hopefully, hopefully, Bubba found him every fucking day in the shower, every day, without fail. It's a podcast, and it's done by 2 retired FBI agents. One of them infiltrated NAMBLA. This is the Native American Man Boy Love Association that Charles Janes was a member of. And they got around it to do with the First Amendment and free speech or something like that. And it had a front, basically, and it was way more insidious, but they couldn't prove it. So this guy, I think, went undercover for 3 years inside there, and he had to pretend that he was into it. Mystery Machine is awesome. I've linked their channel at the top of the chat. So yeah, go and have a squiz. They are wicked. I would love to be able to do shit like that. Mystery Machine is another channel, Wild Aussie Woman. That's whose video I used to explain the story of Jeffrey Curley, because it was the best of the lot that I'd seen, pretty much. And they just do it so well, so clear. So it's just another creator. That's all. So shout out. Thank you very much. Let me share this one. So this is True Spies. I will drop there. Oh, go away. Their link in chat. Do you thank them? Where is it? Come on. Yeah. Okay. We got better. We got 720 this one, not 360. Woo! All right.
True stories behind the world's greatest espionage operations. You'll meet the people who navigate this secret world. Life undercover might take you.
I posed as a contract killer, as a drug dealer, both as a high roller drug dealer and a street level drug dealer. I was a white collar criminal, been an international arms dealer.
In his 26-year-long career as a street agent in the FBI, Bob Hamer was thrown more than a few curveballs.
I've been shot at. I've shot people. I've had a contract put out on my life. I've had a gun put to my head, but never anything that ripped at the fabric of my soul.
Until, that is, he found himself walking through Manhattan one evening, shoulder to shoulder, with a new type of target.
We assembled about 25 or 30 of us, and we began to walk from Grand Central Station to Times Square.
This stroll through the big city is Bob Hamer's first face-to-face contact with the organization he's been stalking for more than a year.
As we were getting a little closer, I could sense the excitement. It was almost like when you go to the big game, and as you know the game is about to start, and you begin to find your seat, and you could just sense this excitement. I could sense the excitement that these men were feeling, and I didn't understand it.
To the casual observer, they might be a group of businessmen on their way to dinner to blow off steam after a day at a dull conference. But their destination was no restaurant, no theater.
And then we walked into Toys R Us, and they literally ran to a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel. They ran to the railing, and they looked over the Ferris wheel, and they watched these little boys that were in the Ferris wheel going around on this ride. And I sat there and I listened to some of these men talk about what they wanted to do to little boys.
A warning. To hear the story of Bob Hamer's infiltration of this group of men is to follow him down a rabbit hole to a dark and depraved place, one that parents will recognize as the setting of their very worst nightmares. This assignment would see a consummate professional, a man with decades of experience inside criminal organizations of the most violent ilk, redefine his entire understanding of evil.
Now, up until this time, I had communicated with members that were in prison. I had been shocked by some of the graphic images that they described in their letters to me, but I guess I naively assumed that all the bad ones were in jail. But they weren't. They were right there at the railing talking about some of the most graphic things they wanted to do to these little boys.
You do not have to come with Bob Hamer on this journey. If you choose to do so, like him, you may find yourself disturbed by the enemy that lurks in plain sight.
Had I just been a regular FBI agent walking past and hearing these guys, I probably would have...
Zero tolerance. Did you see my comment? There was someone yesterday made a comment on my thumbnail of Diane Downs, telling me that I was a lazy creator because I'd used AI to create my thumbnail. He got booted, but my comment still stands. Wasn't pretty. Fuck them all.
Thrown him over the railing. But now here I was, an undercover agent, listening to this, and I realized that they were amongst us. These men, they were out in society, walking amongst us and wanting to do things to children that were reprehensible and vile and evil. And that's when it really hit me that I've got to take this investigation a lot more seriously. And we've got to do something about the men that are in this organization.
The name of the organization is NAMBLA. Bob Hamer is about to walk out of the Toys R Us in Times Square and devote the remaining years of his career to putting them behind bars. But before he does that, let's retrace the steps that brought him here.
Okay, hi. I'm Bob Hamer. I spent 26 years as an FBI agent, all of those years as a street agent.
If you've listened to True Spies before, you'll know that the agent's pathway is often winding. For Bob, it was no different.
I spent 4 years on active duty as a Marine Corps, and I was an attorney. I was a judge advocate. What I realized was that I really did not enjoy being an attorney. There was no excitement in the courtroom for me, so I was looking for something a lot more exciting.
The siren call came buried in the back of his morning paper. He was 29 years old.
I was surprised to find an ad in the sports section of the Los Angeles Times that the CIA was looking for case officers. So I applied. My very first meeting, I went into a room at the Federal Building in Southern California. It was a small room. There were 2 chairs in the room. I sat down. All of a sudden, this man walks in and he's got a scar from ear to ear. And I'm thinking, this is the excitement I'm looking for. I mean, this guy's got to have stories to tell.
More interviews followed. Cryptic assignments to demonstrate his chops as a potential spy.
Fly under an assumed name, pay cash for everything, and you will be reimbursed once you arrive in Washington, D.C.
Then came the tests. Language aptitude, current affairs. Bob was getting close. He could tell.
I flew back to San Diego. I told my wife, I said, honey, we're going to be spies. This is really cool. This is so much neater than being an attorney.
There was just one final hurdle to hop over.
And then I went back for my third and final interview. And during the course of the testing, they had given me a personality test. And apparently they graded you from a 0 to a 10. A 0 could be caught on a deserted island and spend the rest of his life there and be perfectly content. And a 10 had to be constantly surrounded by people.
Your classic psych evaluation. Bob Hamer knew exactly what these people were after.
I got to admit, I kind of skewed my answers. I mean, I thought they were looking for some guy that they drop behind the enemy lines. He shoots the third world dictator, and then they extricate him by a helicopter. But when the psychologist came to interview me after the results of the test, he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, I've never seen a 0 personality.
As it turned out, Bob might have overcooked his answers somewhat.
Apparently, they were looking for 3s and 4s. They wanted somebody that essentially could sidle up to people at embassy parties and convince them to betray their country. To this day, my wife will still remind me that I'm the only person declared a 0 personality by the federal government.
So the CIA didn't pan out, but Bob had also put in an application with the FBI.
I'd gone through the written exam, the oral exam. Everything was looking really good for moving forward in the FBI. And then they had a 1-year hiring freeze.
With his tenure in the Marines all but over and a young family to support, Bob had to resign himself to the reality that a life of excitement might not be on the cards.
I'd taken a job with a firm in Los Angeles, and it was a Monday night, and I literally prayed to God. And I said, look, you'll get more money if I take this job in Los Angeles, but I wish that the CIA or the FBI would call. And the very next morning, I received a phone call, and the FBI said, look, we just had somebody drop out. Can you come back to Quantico, Virginia, to the FBI Academy within the month and begin your term as an FBI agent?
Prayers answered. Bob Hamer began his life as an FBI street agent. He was not disappointed by his first days on the beat.
I loved being out on the street. I loved investigating crimes. My first assignments involved kidnappings, bank robberies, extortions. It was real FBI work. I mean, just like the kind of stuff you see on television.
But there was one angle to the job that he was keen to get some experience in.
I had met with several people when I was back at the FBI Academy who'd worked undercover. The undercover work seemed pretty exciting to me. So I was looking for an opportunity to work undercover. And within about 6 months of being a street agent, the opportunity arose where I could assume an undercover role.
Bob's first undercover assignment was to cozy up to the Italian-American mafia via his target, Dave.
Dave was a highline residential burglar who had hit some of the biggest homes in the Southwest, stealing jewelry, art, gold, anything of value in these homes. At one point, we flew over to Scottsdale, Arizona. I met with some mob guys at a restaurant. After we'd had dinner, we went back into the back room of a restaurant. And the owner of the restaurant, who was a mob guy, pulled out a tray and started cutting lines of cocaine.
A moment torn straight from the script of a late-night crime movie. The undercover cop, the mobsters, the mound of cocaine. But this wasn't TV. This was real. And Bob Hamer had to think on his feet.
They started cutting the cocaine, and I'm thinking, man, this is getting real. Now what do I do? And when it came to me, I kind of shrugged my shoulders like, I'm just going to pass. And all of a sudden, Joe, one of the targets of this investigation, opens up a drawer and pulls out a gun, puts a gun to my head and says, if you don't do a line, you must be a cop.
This is your very first assignment as an undercover agent, and you have not been prepared for a moment like this. There's a gun to your head, a line of cocaine under your nose, and you're surrounded by enemy targets. What would you do?
I said, look, I'll do your line, but I can't do cane products. I'm allergic to cane. I can't even do Novocaine at a dentist. My heart's going to stop, and good luck trying to explain to the paramedic why I am in need of emergency assistance. Dave, the guy that I'd been running with, who was the other target of our investigation, turned to Joe and he said, hey, I'm not going to do this either. So Joe put the gun down.
It was Bob's first taste of the excitement he'd been so desperate for in the Marines, and it was far more addictive than any drug he turned down that night. Over the next 26 years in the Bureau, Bob Hamer would chase that high time and time again. He lived to look his targets in the eye, to teeter close to the brink, to almost get caught.
I have a lot of respect for the sniper. These guys that sit on the rooftops and sight in their target and pull the trigger when necessary. But also, I like the idea of getting close to my target. And that was the difference between being an undercover agent and being a case agent. Many times a case agent will sit back and do the investigation. He will gather all the evidence that's needed for a successful prosecution and may not even have contact with the target until they're ready to make the arrest. But with an undercover agent, now you're face to face.
Bob developed his own personal philosophy for undercover work, one that he borrowed from the Native Americans of the Great Plains.
The Plains Indians in America had something that they called counting coup, and they would have coup sticks. The idea was to sneak up close enough to your enemy and to touch him with your coup stick, and then successfully ride away. And they would take this coup stick and then mark on it. Well, that's kind of the way I felt with as an undercover agent. I had this coup stick, and kind of an invisible coup stick, and I was able to get close enough to the enemy that I could touch him with my coup stick and not be captured, not be harmed, but eventually would take down my enemy.
Bob never lost the taste for that contact, that danger. In fact, when the job wasn't living up to the excitement of a gun to the head, he had a few tricks up his sleeve to liven things up.
I was always trying to get that adrenaline flowing, and I would just see how far I could push the envelope without getting caught. So oftentimes I would play music. I think my favorite, I was involved in an international weapons deal, and there was this song by country western artist Charlie Daniels, and the song was called Uneasy Rider. And there was a line in that song, and every time the target of our investigation got into my undercover car and I turned the ignition to the car on, the first line you heard on every tape was that song. And Charlie Daniels singing, "Don't you know this man's a spy? He's an undercover agent for the FBI."
How's that for counting coup? Bob Hamer played dozens of roles in his time as an undercover agent. Mobsters, contract killers, degenerate gamblers. But the one that left its biggest mark, the one that would deliver him to that gut-churning encounter with evil in a children's megastore, came near the end of his career. Like most of his assignments, it began with a phone call from a colleague, an FBI case officer.
And he said, "Look, Bob, we have an undercover operation available. It involves sex tours to Thailand." And I kind of laughed and I said, "Hey, sign me up."
Anything to get out of the office, right?
If I figure your tax dollars are paying for me to get massages over in Thailand, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And he said, "If you'd like, I can provide a little more details."
Those pesky details, always bursting the bubble. The case agent filled Bob in on the background to his assignment.
An individual was arrested back in Knoxville, Tennessee. And during the arrest and the search of his laptop computer, they found that he had child pornography on the computer and videos.
Videos filmed by the man himself, featuring unspeakable crimes committed against children on foreign soil.
During the interrogation, he admitted that he went to Thailand and it was set up through a travel agent that was based in Hollywood, California.
The Bureau wondered how many like this man were traveling overseas to fulfill their darkest impulses.
And they decided that they were going to take a look at this travel agent that was putting together these overseas travel excursions for boy lovers, or BLs is what they call themselves.
Bob began his research into so-called boy lovers and found himself running into the same letters, scattered across dark corners of the internet time and time again. NAMBLA. The letters stood for the North American Man-Boy Love Association.
NAMBLA began in 1978 There had been a problem in the Boston, Massachusetts area where some men had been arrested for luring boys into their home, showing them pornography, engaging in alcohol and drug abuse, and then engaging in sexual promiscuity with these boys. There was a law enforcement effort, and these men were arrested. Now there was an uproar about this whole situation, and people got together saying it was wrong because the boys had agreed to consensually engage in sex with these men. There was a meeting in a church, and during that meeting, this group of NAMBLA was formed.
As unbelievable as it may sound, this group of self-declared boy lovers were a First Amendment protected organization. Their stated purpose was to abolish the laws of consent that rendered any sexual contact between an adult and a child statutory rape.
When the organization first started, it was actually pretty open. They participated in gay pride parades. You can find photographs on the internet of men marching with NAMBLA, holding up their banners.
But that transparency came to an end in the late 90s with a horrific news story that shook the nation.
There was a little boy named Jeffrey Curley that was killed by a NAMBLA member and an associate. The child was horribly tortured, disfigured, raped, and his body was stuck in a container and thrown off a bridge. During the course of this investigation, they learned that just prior to the assault, the NAMBLA member had been in a public library and had gone on the NAMBLA website. And the charges were that essentially he received the type of accolades and enthusiasm that he needed in order to move forward to solicit sex and to attack this child.
Jeffrey Curley's murder brought a great deal of exposure to NAMBLA, but the organization still claimed to be nothing more than an advocacy group. Bob Hamer wasn't buying it.
It was clear from my research that NAMBLA was something more than just a political lobbying organization to abolish the age of consent law. In fact, it was an opportunity for like-minded men to get together and share stories of their sexual conquests, of where they could go to find boys, of what they could do and how they could seduce boys.
So in 2001, he took his first step into an unsettling new world.
I ended up joining the organization as part of this undercover operation on the travel agent. I just figured to add to my credibility, I should become a member of NAMBLA. It only took submitting an application and $35. And within a week or two, I received a letter back announcing my membership to NAMBLA.
The travel agent case ultimately fell apart, but Bob had already begun to embed himself in this disparate community of pedophiles and sex offenders.
I was a member of the organization and began getting solicitations from them to send Christmas cards and participate in a pen pal program for the NAMBLA members that were in prison. I contacted our assistant United States attorney and said, hey, I've got this opportunity. I'd like to go ahead and pursue it. And she gave me permission to send out Christmas cards and begin to engage in a pen pal program.
Bob's plan was to infiltrate NAMBLA and smoke out the predators who called it home, locking up as many as he possibly could in the process. But to do that, he would need to create a cover unlike any other in his career.
Clearly, if I'm posing as a contract killer, you don't really care whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, where I like cricket or baseball, or whether I like the opera or country and Western music. All you care about is whether you believe I have the ability to kill the person that you want killed. But in NAMBLA, this was a complete change of character for me, in that I had to be 100% a NAMBLA member. I had to be a boy lover. I had to think like them. I had to talk like them. I had to walk like them. And it was going to be 24/7.
Bob had been accepted as a member of NAMBLA. He had paid his dues and begun corresponding with boy lovers. But actually meeting them face to face was going to prove difficult.
Because of the lawsuits that arose out of Jeffrey Curley, NAMBLA was afraid of exposure. It was no longer open in its membership. It was no longer marching in parades with NAMBLA flyers. They were no longer having open meetings in libraries and public buildings. They'd essentially gone underground. And I was told that it would take 3 years before I could be invited to one of their meetings.
In the meantime, Bob got to work infiltrating the group from afar, in whatever capacity he could.
I had been participating in their Christmas card program, in their pen pal program. I even wrote for their magazine. They have a magazine called the NAMBLA Bulletin, and I wrote for that.
Given the organization's secrecy, he was surprised when, after just 18 months of membership, he was invited to the NAMBLA annual conference in New York City.
Apparently, because of my participation in the pen pal program and because NAMBLA members in prison had complimented management about how good I was about corresponding. And because of my efforts to write the articles for the magazine, they viewed me as a true believer and invited me back to New York City for that first face-to-face meeting with NAMBLA members.
This was the moment Bob had been waiting for. It was time to finally give Robert Wallace, the alias under which he had joined NAMBLA, his first public outing since the failed travel agent case.
When we began the travel agent case, I was fearful that I kind of looked too much like a cop, that I smelled like a cop, and that I needed to come off with a little softer image. So I literally went to the Salvation Army and bought a walking stick, and I affected a limp and told the travel agent that I had a medical condition. And I kind of liked that idea. So I just kind of kept up with that as I pursued this NAMBLA investigation.
With his walking stick on the aeroplane seat beside him, Bob Hamer flew from California to New York, where he would meet the group he had been circling for more than a year. He knew that winning their trust would not be easy.
It was interesting. This was the most paranoid group that I'd ever infiltrated. I'd worked gangs in South Central Los Angeles for 5 years. I'd worked some major drug organizations. I worked some international criminal organizations. I infiltrated the La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mafia. But never in any of these infiltrations did I meet a group as paranoid as NAMBLA.
NAMBLA was so paranoid, in fact, they wouldn't reveal details of the conference's location.
My initial meeting with them was at Grand Central Station. I put on my best boy lover face and hobbled down the ramp to the lower dining concourse. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know any of these members. We had some grainy photographs of possible members, but as I said earlier, NAMBLA was a First Amendment protected organization. So the Bureau didn't have a folder of NAMBLA members or NAMBLA photographs. So I'm going down the ramp to the lower concourse, and I'm thinking, how am I going to identify these guys?
As it turned out, Bob needn't have worried.
And all of a sudden, I look over, and there's a group of men huddled in a circle, and it was like, holy smokes, Central Casting, send me some perverts.
But as Bob approached the group, he noticed something that surprised him.
As I got closer and began to talk with the guys, I realized that not everyone looked like a Central Casting character. Some of them looked normal. They could have been your son's baseball coach or school teacher or the guy next door.
You already know what happened next. The surprise excursion to Toys R Us, the Ferris wheel, the impulse to hurl each and every NAMBLA member present from the railing to the floor 60 feet below. There's one aspect of Bob Hamer's experience as an undercover agent that I haven't told you about. It's a big part of what drew him to this line of work in the first place.
I have to say that my favorite class in college was a course called Deviant Behavior. And I laugh as I look back on it because I either portrayed everyone we studied in that class or I arrested everyone that we studied in that class. But as a result of that, I've had an interest in people that are different. I've always enjoyed sitting down with somebody that maybe I didn't agree with politically or religiously or even culturally and just learning from them.
As far as Bob can tell, this is what separated him from most of his colleagues at the Bureau.
What I found in the FBI is that most people saw the world, most law enforcement officers saw the world in black and white. And either you violated the law or you didn't violate the law. But if you're going to be an undercover agent, you've got to see the gray. You have to understand that there is something in between that violation of the law and that adherence to the law. And to me, that's the gray area.
It was this willingness, this capacity to see the gray, that allowed Bob to thrive on any assignment he was placed on.
Bad guys can smell fear. They can smell hatred. If you go into a situation where you are appalled by the behavior of your target and you hate that person for what they've done, they're going to pick up on that. So you as the undercover agent, you've got to find the gray. You have to latch on to some good quality of that person and be able to deal with that good quality and set aside all of the evil that they've been doing. We used to kind of laugh and say, other than a serial killer, the guy's a pretty nice guy.
Serial killers are one thing, but Bob Hamer had just watched a group of adult men gather in a toy store and describe, in graphic detail, the things they wanted to do to the innocent children around them. Surely this was about as black and white as cases come.
For me, it was up until that point, it really was black and white. You harm a child, you go to prison. That was my attitude. And I still had that attitude, but now I realized that to work undercover, I was going to have to see the gray. I was going to have to find that characteristic in each of these men that at least I could latch onto, that I could kind of separate out the Bob Hamer from the Bob Wallace. And I had to become that boy lover just long enough to engage with them and to see whether or not we could put together some prosecutable cases.
After the sickening shock of the Toys R Us expedition, the rest of the New York conference was, well, relatively pedestrian.
The meetings talked a lot more about the NAMBLA agenda, the NAMBLA mission statement, talked about NAMBLA history. But during the meeting, there were never any type of discussions about where we can go to find little boys, where we can go to seduce little boys, what we can do to seduce little boys, or what type of sex acts that we can do on children. So none of that took place during the meetings. Those kind of discussions took place during the breaks.
One weekend in New York was enough to confirm Bob's suspicions. NAMBLA was less an advocacy group than it was a networking opportunity for sexual predators. During the breaks and evenings of the conference, the men around him readily discussed their desires, their preferences. But as a new member to NAMBLA, there was a limit to the access that Bob was afforded. His main aims were to get in with the group, to not blow his cover, and to make contacts.
I didn't do a whole lot of probing, but I did develop a couple relationships at that first meeting. One of them was an individual who was an ordained minister that was a chiropractor that lived in California. And he and I exchanged email addresses and talked at various times throughout the 3-day weekend.
It was this ordained minister, called Jeff, who provided the first opening to the inner circle of NAMBLA in the months after the New York conference.
We were exchanging emails, phone calls, and getting together for meetings. And I was trying to see if there was anything there that could help us move forward, at least with this one person that I had met at the conference that was a boy lover, that admitted to me on several different occasions of having sex with underage boys and traveling to have the sex with underage boys, all in violation of federal law.
As Bob got closer to Jeff, he gained valuable insight into the psyche of his target.
He said that he was going through a 12-step program, trying to up his age of preference beyond the criminal age, and was seeking to get away from the pedophilia, but in fact he wasn't. And he would tell me about the email exchanges that he had with a 14-year-old and how he was hoping that maybe he could have sex with this 14-year-old, and was willing to travel to Canada to meet with the 14-year-old. Even though he was trying to get away from this aberration, he moved forward and would bring up something that it would just like, okay, we got to continue to target this guy.
Eventually, he saw his moment to strike.
I had told him that I had lost my entire collection of child pornography. My computer crashed and I lost everything. And at one point, he invited me to lunch. When we went to lunch, he said, I think I have something here you're going to like. And he handed me a thumb drive. When we got back and reviewed the thumb drive, it had 125 images of child pornography and 8 videos of men having sex with boys.
This prosecutable offense was the first payoff after 2 years investigating NAMBLA. Bob Hamer had his first taste of blood, and he wanted more. Fortunately, the opportunity for a bigger catch was about to present itself.
I get invited to the next meeting, which is going to be in Miami, Florida, for another general conference with selected members of the organization.
Now that Bob had established himself as an active, trusted NAMBLA member, it was time to amp up his infiltration.
We're getting ready for the Miami conference, and we decided we're going to push this a little bit further, and that I have the opportunity now to probably be more open since I've successfully got through that first meeting in New York.
With his case agent, he devised a plan.
We had set up a phony travel agency, and I was going to go down to Miami and tell them that I was aware of a travel agency that was putting together overseas sex tours for boy lovers.
Bob was to float the idea of a trip to his new friends in NAMBLA, somewhere exotic, accommodating, somewhere they could let loose. If he could convince the members of the group to commit to that kind of plan, the FBI could nail them. The charge would be conspiracy to travel to engage in sex with a minor. Bob Hamer arrived in Miami, fully prepared to take a more active role in discussions and steer conversations in the direction he needed to.
And had only been there a few minutes when someone I had not met at the previous meeting walks in with Peter Herman. And Peter, essentially the head of NAMBLA, introduces me to David. And we begin talking.
As it turned out, Bob wouldn't need to steer any conversations to get what he was after.
Before we get very far into the conversation, David brings up the fact, asking me if I like to travel. And I said, well, I go to Atlantic City every once in a while. And he said, well, I am an international flight attendant, and I have gone to Thailand and to Mexico, and Thailand is great, and begins to talk about the sexual encounters he had had at Thailand.
From a legal perspective, David was making Bob's life a hell of a lot easier.
In my mind, I'm thinking he is initiating. I didn't bring this up. He's the one that initiated going to Thailand. He's the one that talked about Mexico. From a legal perspective, he's taken away the entrapment argument because he's bringing it up.
This set the theme for the rest of the conference. As in New York, the meetings themselves were full of dry procedural details about the operation of NAMBLA. But the breaks between meetings, where David took an active role, were much more interesting to our undercover agent.
So during one of our first breaks the next morning, he was talking about travel. A few of the other members had mentioned, one had mentioned that he'd been in Amsterdam. One had talked about going down into the Bahamas. And all of these men had admitted to traveling overseas and having sex with boys while overseas.
And, of course, they did so on tape. Throughout his entire investigation of NAMBLA, Bob Hamer was wearing a wire. Each admission was recorded and saved, waiting to be deployed as evidence in the prosecution that Bob longed for. All he had to do was pull together a little NAMBLA field trip and convince these predators to sign up.
I had happened to mention that somebody that I knew had gone to a place down in Mexico and that I was going to research that. David said he was going to research a couple places in Costa Rica that he'd heard about. And so the idea was that as we left, that we would begin researching and try to come up with a location where we could all get together for actually what we called a BLT, a boy lover tour.
Remember, Bob's colleagues at the FBI have already set up a fake travel agency, one that would be willing to pull together exactly the kind of trip that NAMBLA members would be interested in.
Now that we've got the travel agency, now that we've got a couple people on board wanting to take the trip, obviously, as a federal investigation, we wanted to expand anyone who was willing to go on the trip and invite them.
The first two willing tourists that Bob signed up were David and a dentist called Todd. To win their confidence, Bob Hamer had to put a lifetime of seeing the gray to good use.
Fortunately, and I do mean fortunately, each of the people that we're targeting had some type of, I guess you could call it a redeeming social value. David, the international flight attendant that we eventually learned was a PhD psychologist who worked at 2 Chicago area hospitals, was a funny guy. He was just humorous, and so you were able to laugh at him. One of the other guys was a dentist, and he was a nice guy. He was someone that you could actually sit down and converse with. Mm-hmm. So I was able to kind of latch on to that quality, that gray quality that I needed in order to continue to convince them that I was one of them.
As he won their trust, Bob furnished his new friends with more and more details of the once-in-a-lifetime trip he was planning. The destination was to be Mexico.
I had made up the fact that this BB&B, a bed, breakfast, and boys, was just below Ensenada. And it was a boat that would pick you up in Los Angeles and San Diego, and we could get a discount if we had 10 people. So trying to use that as a ploy to get them to invite other people so that we could save money on the trip.
Bob encouraged David and Todd to invite others from the NAMBLA network to jump on this opportunity.
One of the persons that Todd and David wanted to invite was Paul. And Paul was a bodybuilder, a fitness trainer, one of those guys that if you saw him, he would not be your central casting boy lover.
There was also a new face at the Miami conference that had caught Bob's attention.
A guy named Sam Lindblad. And Sam, it turned out, had been convicted previously on at least 2 occasions of solicitation or having sex with little boys. And in fact, at the Miami meeting, admitted that he'd only been out of prison a little over a year, where he had served 7 years for sex with a minor. So that was a guy that I was interested in and wanted to pursue him probably more so than anyone else, because here he was a convicted sex offender that was still interested in pursuing the boy lover agenda.
Bob knew there was no seeing the gray with a character like Sam Lindblad. He'd done it before, and he would do it again. He couldn't let him slip through his fingers.
While we were at the conference, I had mentioned to Sam that I had written for the NAMBLA Bulletin. Because he had been in prison, I thought that it might be a good idea if we wrote an article about boy lovers in prison and how we could protect ourselves if we were incarcerated.
After the conference, with travel plans for Mexico in full swing, Bob flew to Albuquerque to interview Sam, ostensibly for the NAMBLA Bulletin.
I'd done a little research on the internet and I found what I thought to be a great restaurant in Albuquerque. It was a 5-star restaurant. It wasn't coming out of my pocket. It was tax dollars. So I was going to eat big or go home. Man, we had a great meal. It got my undercover Yelp review that I would would recommend it to anyone.
Sam was edgy at the start of the meal. Local police had been rummaging through his trash. He was certain he was being watched.
So he was talking about his paranoia and his fear. And at one point I said, that's why I picked this expensive restaurant, because I know no cop could afford to eat here. And he just smiled and he said that he appreciated that. Well, he didn't know that there were 2 FBI agents sitting about 2 tables away that were watching us.
Bob's tradecraft in drawing Sam out of his paranoid shell during that meal was nothing short of exemplary. Listen and learn.
I told him that I was writing an article, and I brought a notebook and I had questions laid out. And because of my condition, it was hard for me to write. So is it okay if I record our answers while I still try to take some rough notes? And he said, sure, that was okay. So I had a little recorder and I would put it on the table and I would press the record button and then I would ask the questions. And then at one point I turned off the recorder and he saw that the recorder was off. And I said, so how many boys did you really molest? And he began to tell me the number of boys that he had groomed.
All of which was caught, of course, on the second recording device strapped to Bob's torso.
And then as we began to get to the end of the meeting, I said, what is the one thing that you want us to warn the membership? And I will never forget this. It was kind of one of those production moments when you're making a big film. And he balled his fists and he closed his eyes and he said, there are so many sting operations out there. I didn't know it before, but just be careful. And it was like, cut, print, we've got it. Here he was right in the middle of this sting operation, and he didn't understand it.
Bob left that meeting with a tape full of criminal admissions and a commitment from Sam Lindblad that he would join the NAMBLA party on their boy lover trip. And even better, he wanted to invite yet another NAMBLA member. With the addition of Sam's friend Dick, 7 were now on board to travel to the BB&B in Ensenada. The problem was, this in and of itself was not a federal offense.
One of the things that made this investigation different than anything that I had worked in my previous undercover operations, at this point, Jeff is the only one that's committed a criminal violation by giving me child pornography. With the other 7, they haven't committed a criminal offense. In this case, all we had was Jeff. We had 7 people that were willing to go on the trip, that had committed a few overt acts in that.
Can you hear me now? Yay! We have green lights, motherfucker! You can hear me now, yeah? But you're spewing now. I have no idea what happened there. None. Everything was set. Everything was working. Everything was powered up. I unplugged it, plugged it in. Who the heck knows? Thanks, Brian.
That they had contacted me, they had emailed me, they had contacted the travel agent, they had provided a down payment for the trip. But the statute was written in such a way that you had to travel in interstate commerce.
All of this made Bob very nervous.
With any conspiracy, if you withdraw from the conspiracy before it's completed, oftentimes the prosecutor won't go forward. So we were to the point in this case that until we actually had them traveling in interstate commerce, until we had them on that particular day getting ready to board our boat, which is what was supposed to take us down to this bed, breakfast, and boys in Mexico, we probably didn't have a violation.
With 7 predators unwittingly tangled up in the trap he had laid, Bob Hamer knew he had to finalize the details of his sting operation. He was busy organizing interstate flights for his targets to arrive in San Diego or Los Angeles when he received a phone call from Dick, the boy lover that Sam Lindblad had mentioned in Albuquerque. Dick told Bob that he had some last-minute reservations about this trip to Mexico.
And he was worried about the fact that this could be a sting operation. In no uncertain terms, he literally laid out our operations order. He told us that if he were running this case, and he reminded me that President Bush had signed legislation that made travel in interstate and international commerce a federal violation. And he's told me that if he were running the FBI or a federal agency, he would set up a sting operation where you would get people to deposit money, agree to travel, and then when they showed up to travel, they would be arrested.
Put yourself in Bob's shoes here. You've spent more than 3 years infiltrating one of the most secretive criminal organizations on the planet. You've sidled up alongside a group of men whose very existence repulses you. You've meticulously plotted out an operation that will land multiple sexual predators where they belong, in prison. Now, you are hearing the exact details of that operation, laid out before you by one of the sting's targets. What would you do?
I know that while I was talking to him, I was smiling because it was like, this is the challenge. I'm not going to entrap him, but I just kind of wet the whistle and explained to him that I understand why he's cautious, that I'm cautious. And I had looked into it. And the person that told me about the trip had already gone, that he had gone last year, that nothing happened. I explained to him that I'd been a member for many years at NAMBLA, that I'd written for their magazine. I was in good standing.
Bob turned on that zero personality once again. Dick was placated. Everything was coming together. Bob had won the trust of NAMBLA's inner circle, and that was crucial for an investigation like this one. You see, it was not enough for the NAMBLA members to commit to traveling to Mexico. They also had to outline what they intended to do once they arrived.
In this case, I had to get them to admit that their primary purpose of travel was to have sex, and specifically what sex acts they were going to perform or that they planned on performing sex. So in other words, they weren't just coming to San Diego to go down to Mexico because the weather was warmer than what it was in Chicago.
Bob and his colleagues at the FBI designed a kind of menu of services that the bed, breakfast, and boys would offer.
And I needed to know from each of these men what their age of preference was and what their sexual acts that they wanted performed.
If you were somehow in any doubt of the criminal intention behind this group of men, you will find all the proof you need on the tapes of those conversations. This was the final piece of the puzzle for Bob Hamer.
We've got the criminal admissions from everyone. We have the down payments for everyone. We have the travel reservations for everyone. So we're getting ready to rock and roll.
There are just days left until Bob Hamer springs the trap he's been carefully setting for the past 3.5 years. 7 pedophiles are due to arrive in Los Angeles and San Diego to board a boat to Ensenada. In doing so, they are signing their own arrest warrant. Bob is excited and determined, but he's also distracted.
At this time, I'm working 3 separate undercover operations at the same time. I'm involved with an Asian gang that's selling crystal meth and ecstasy. I'm involved in an Asian criminal syndicate that is involved in counterfeit goods, stolen cars, a $60 million shoulder fire missile deal. We are discussing a conspiracy to build a meth factory in North Korea. And I'm purchasing the Supernote, a North Korean manufactured counterfeit $100 US currency bill that is nearly undetectable by the naked eye. So I've got a lot of balls in the air that I'm trying to keep balanced.
Just your average week at the office then. But the stress of keeping 3 separate undercover operations moving, of living inside 3 distinct covers, was beginning to mount.
And within a week of the NAMBLA case going down, I end up having an attack of ischemic colitis. I end up in intensive care.
Bob Hamer is not the kind to dwell on the physical impact that a job like this can take on a person, and much less the emotional one. But his infiltration of NAMBLA had left him burnt down to a nub.
I've spent 4 days in the hospital, 2 days in intensive care. At one point, I'm laying in the intensive care room, and I hear them call for a crash cart to room 26. And I'm literally thinking, boy, somebody's in trouble. And the crash cart shows up in my room. And they're looking at me, and my pulse had gone down to 26.
Even as he lay there, as close to death as he had come on any of his many undercover operations, Bob had only one thing on his mind.
I literally prayed and I said, you know, God, if it's my time, it's my time. But if I die, you're going to screw up 3 pretty good cases that we've got going.
It seems that someone upstairs was looking out for him. Bob was released from hospital on the Monday. On Friday, he was due to collect 3 NAMBLA members from the San Diego airport, but he was worried that his silence over the previous days had left them spooked.
When I finally get home from the hospital, I email everybody and tell them that I'd had a medical emergency, but I'm doing okay. And come hell or high water, I'm going to make this trip to Ensenada. So the trip is still on.
David, the flight attendant, Todd, the dentist, and Paul, the bodybuilder, arrive in San Diego. The group of 4 tourists are to stay one night at an airport hotel before embarking on a life-changing trip in the morning. In Los Angeles, 4 more NAMBLA members are to be picked up by Bob's colleagues in the FBI and arrested on the docks. Now, Bob simply had to sit back and watch the show unfold.
The 4 of us, the 3 NAMBLA members and myself, had breakfast in San Diego at the hotel. My case agent up in Los Angeles had called to say, okay, the 4 people showed up and we've arrested everybody. So we've got 4 in custody now. They've fulfilled the elements of the offense by attempting to get on the boat.
4 predators in cuffs, 120 miles up the road. You have to imagine that Bob Hamer allowed himself a smile on receiving that call.
Now I tell David and Todd and Paul that I just heard that they got on the boat. The boat is heading down here. It should take 3 hours to get to the port here in San Diego.
Bob and the 3 NAMBLA members nervously scratch away at the remaining hours of the morning. For Bob, these are the final moments of a 3-year-long investigation. For his guests in the hotel, it will be their final morning of freedom for a long time to come.
We waited about 3 hours. Then I get a phone call. The arrest teams are in place down by the dock. I tell them that the captain called. The boat is going to be there in about a half hour. Let's load up all the bags in my car.
3 pedophiles and an undercover agent pile into a car for a short drive to the docks.
And now as the 4 of us get out of the car, we're walking in the rain. As we're walking toward the dock, I hear that sound that every undercover agent loves to hear. Halt, FBI. Put up your hands. You're under arrest.
This is the moment you've been waiting for. Drink it in, Bob Hamer. You've earned it.
I'm going to admit the truth here. I put on a show. When they said, FBI, you're under arrest, I kind of threw up my crutch, let out this unmanly scream, and acted like I was fainting. And one of my buddies on the SWAT team ran over and caught me before I fell down on the ground. But once they put me in the back of the car and pulled away, and I saw everyone else, and I could see total dejection on their face, and knew that they knew that this had all gone wrong, and they'd been caught up in a sting operation. They still didn't know that it was me, but they knew that they'd been arrested by the FBI and that they were in violation of the law and their lives were going to be changed.
Bob Hamer's infiltration of NAMBLA yielded 8 convictions. The 7 who conspired to travel to Mexico to engage in sex with minors, as well as the ordained minister who supplied Bob with child pornography. All but 1 pled guilty. Only Sam Lindblad, the twice convicted offender, went to trial, where he was sentenced to 30 years. Now, as Bob Hamer looks back on one of the final cases of a life spent undercover, he realizes just how much of a toll this investigation took on his life. He spent 3.5 years alone amongst the wolves, with no one to turn to.
We see a psychologist every 6 months in the undercover program, but I was fearful of telling those psychologists how it was impacting me or how I felt, because in reality, I wanted to kill them all. And I knew that if they knew that, they were going to pull me out of the investigation.
But what's most remarkable, perhaps, about this whole investigation was that Bob Hamer managed to cling to enough of himself to keep his spirit intact. He even had a little fun with it from time to time. Take the Christmas card he sent out to all his NAMBLA pals halfway through the investigation.
I actually have an FBI blanket. And one Christmas, my wife took a picture of me. I'm sitting in front of the Christmas tree with a walker because I was handicapped. I have the blanket over my knees, but I have the FBI blanket folded in such a way that if you know the FBI seal, you recognize this as being the FBI seal.
Even in a world as depraved as this one, Bob Hamer wanted to look his enemy in the eye and feel the thrill of the near miss.
It was just one more opportunity for me, I guess one more notch on my acoustic to get close to them and touch them, and they not realize that they're being targeted by the Bureau.
I'm Vanessa Kirby. Join us next week for another brush with true spies. We all have valuable spy skills, and our experts are here to help you discover yours.
How good's that? Yeah. It got me. Which is why I'm showing it. Now, Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Am I on? The reason I stopped before to talk was to say that I was talking to Teresia yesterday, and she sent me this clip on the judge that was shot, that they caught on CCTV. Absolutely chilled to the bone, like and I shared it on Discord. Did you all see it, or do you want me to play it while I'm here? Because it's just the music got me. Did you see the whole clip that they showed? Have you not seen it, Simi? All right. It's chilling, absolutely chilling. Where's my history? Okie dokie. You have to thank Teresa for this one. So, and I got an email today. My video yesterday on Diane Downs was shut down. Shut down. Copyright violation from Oprah Winfrey. So I had to cut the whole thing out. Damn you, Oprah. Oh, Jesus, way back. Oh, I don't think I watched it on here. I think I watched it on. Oh, crap. Where was it? I'll go back and get the link from. Oh. Oh, just the music is getting me. Whoa. This person here is the judge. Okay? Because it took me half of the video to work that out. I might have to put some kind of banner up, just an overlay so I don't get copied. You don't need it. It actually adds to the suspense of it. So I'm trying to talk Teresia into going down and attending this case. Then the boots on the ground for us, just down the road from her. Where's the preacher? Yeah. The sheriff is in the doorway. That's the sheriff there. Sheriff Steins? Is it Steins? That's him there. That's the sheriff. I want to know what the deal is with the car, the SUV ute thing driving around. Who was that? Bye, Simmy. Don't work too hard, darling. Not even like they're having a heated conversation or anything. It's just, and smoking inside too. Like that got me. I'm like, you never see that anymore. But as soon as you see him flip the buckle on his holster, it's on his right hip. Yeah. But I think he had 2 phones, didn't he? His gun's hidden under the right hip of his shirt there. Suppose judge makes rule. I wonder if he had messages between the judge and his daughter, perhaps. But still, his body language is comfortable. It's relaxed. It's not like it's stressed or anxious. He was totally out of it. Like, okay. I missed that bit. So he's comparing messages. Ah. Now that makes sense. Okay. Motherfucker. Wait for it. See? Flips it up. There we go. That's my fucking daughter. Ugh. Oh. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Oh. And I think it's the statements of those 2 women that they have now. Yeah, that's because Teresia's there. And the security guard just sits there. Oh, no, it's only 3 gunshots. Don't worry about it. Nah, let the women go. Oh. Yeah. It's killing, isn't it? Was it? I'm just trying to find out if I can find when it's on like we're going to trial, but I just found one in December. The Exorcism of Skylar Wilson. So would it be under Kentucky v. Steins? Security guard just walked straight past, like doesn't even check to see if he's alive. Hearing, status hearing, motion to dismiss, indictment.
I got emergency at the courthouse. I need ambulance here right now. District courtroom.
Which court? Which courthouse?
Court. Lex County.
I have put the link in your Discord. Teresa, it's got the link to all of the documents in this case. And I tried to paste it in WhatsApp, but I don't think it worked. But yes, there's quite a few things in there on as the gavel drops. Actually, I might as well drop it into the main chat. That way everyone can have a look, see, should they need to. I've got it on notifications, so anything that comes into this particular, into that file under that case number will be notified. I'll be notified of it. Okay, so you can have a squeeze through there. It's in the main chat now. Oh shit! No, I put it in stories. Why did I do that? You dickhead! What an idiot! Oh well, it's in both now. Oh, must be why Mandy tried to ring me at 4:30 this morning. She sent me 4 messages. All right, sorry, I got distracted. I will play again.
And what's going on?
Judge has been shot.
The judge?
Yes.
What's his name?
Kevin Mullins.
Go ahead.
What are you got?
Shots fired at Electric County Courthouse and somebody shot Judge Mullins.
Sure can.
No, sir. Just come out on the radio. Well, I told him to put them in separate rooms so they don't talk to each other, too. Yeah. Have you got the witnesses? No. They're doing the witnesses. Who's doing the witnesses? Justin and a couple other people are blocking the witnesses and what down through there.
And the work of securing the crime scene began.
I think he's getting that other one.
Go ahead. They still got the CM-15 in the foyer of the courthouse. There's also some witnesses in the judge's office, not far from where he's at. You want us to go ahead and take him down to the jail so we can get the rest of the witnesses out of the judge's office.
Well, we got a lot going on right now.
I think right.
That it is, brother. You okay?
It looks like he's had some kind of
Why are you going to transport me in a vehicle for?
Probably not to put you in Ledger County Jail. I mean,
Why?
mental health
probably because I don't know though. I don't know if that's happening.
issue.
You don't mind to be down there?
He's absolutely
Well, I mean,
paranoid.
We'll talk about that. You know, I have to talk to see what the logistics is down there.
I got to get put in a vehicle and go outside.
Well, yeah, I understand why you're worried, but at the same time, you know how it is for something like this. We're going to be worried about you in the jail down here with local people. You
Right
know?
now, I'm alive and well, no weapons on me. So if I leave this building, I won't draw another breath.
Yeah, so basically the rest of it is him getting transferred to the prison mainly. Did you want to have a look at some of these
Go where?
some of these
In
documents?
one of these rooms, and we're going to talk real fast.
Oh, yeah, not in one of these right here.
I don't know. I think they cleared one out. So
You feel safe doing that?
why? I ain't gonna let that happen. Okay? I ain't gonna let nothing happen to you. So don't worry about that. I'll stick with you until you go to your cell, okay? You'll be all right. I promise you.
I know better, man.
What? Mickey, you know, we just talked about we known each other forever. I ain't gonna let nobody hurt you. Would you talk right here? If we pulled up some chairs, we'll just talk low. We're just trying to let everybody hear stuff and see everything.
I don't care if everybody hears. I just don't feel safe.
Okay. Well, here you should feel safe. There's cameras here. There's people everywhere. People in there. So if we pull up some chairs right here, would you talk to us right here?
And I don't have a problem with transport and stuff.
Well, that's transport is another issue. We'll make sure you're safe on that too. We'll wait till after we get done talking.
I ain't trying to be difficult, guys, but I don't feel safe.
So we got to know what led to this, Mickey. What transpired leading up to this? Because I know it just didn't happen for no reason. Something's happened. Everything has a reason why it happened and why somebody acts the way they do.
Just be fair to me.
We'll be fair to you.
Just don't beat on me.
I ain't gonna beat on you. Nobody else is gonna beat on you. You know that.
Don't shoot me. Somebody don't want to kill me, man.
Nobody's gonna shoot you. Nobody's gonna kill you.
Don't do that. Don't shoot me. Kill me and stuff.
So what? Tell me about what was going on earlier today. What was you doing earlier today? Tell me about your day.
It was fine.
Good day? Normal stuff? Office stuff? Why was you over here at the courthouse? Was you had to come over here, drop off some papers, so you come over here to talk to somebody?
Court. Come over here all the time.
For court?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the time. Just come over. We had lunch together at Street Side.
Who did?
Several people.
Who all had lunch? Let's talk about it. What happened today?
Which jail are we going to?
I think, not positive, Mickey, but I think they'll transport you to the Leslie County Jail for your safety.
For your safety. And Mickey, you've been around most.
I'll never make it to the Leslie County Jail.
Why? Hey, who do you want to?
Put me in Leslie County Jail. I get killed there. I get killed in the jail. Yes, y'all might as well do it.
Who do you want to transport you? Of all the police officers here, who do you want to go with you? It has to be at least one KSP officer. Even if you ask one of your deputies, who Jason Bates is going to transport you. I'll go with Jason Bates. You know me and Bates our whole lives. You know we ain't going to do anything to you. I'll go with Bates down there with you.
Mickey, why do you think we're going to do something to you? I don't understand that. Why would we want to
There's
hurt
somebody
you?
on the way. Y'all stop and let somebody on the way.
No.
We're going to stop and let somebody do something to you?
No.
That's actually kind of insulting. We do that.
No. We
Look, I know this is obviously a very crappy situation, but I assure you that we have no intentions of harming you whatsoever.
We ain't going to do anything to you.
Yeah, I'm not going back in one of them rooms now.
We ain't. We'll talk right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, be fair to me now.
We're going to be fair.
I seen the look.
From who?
Jackie, y'all, come on now. Don't
No.
kill me.
No, worry about that.
Don't this is let's be fair.
Nobody's going to lay a finger on you. I promise that.
Don't shoot me.
I know.
Like that.
I don't know you nothing like these guys do, Mickey, but unfortunately, they've told me this is my case. But I guarantee you, nobody within the state police has any ill intentions, or nobody's going to lay a finger on you. Why would?
There he is.
Just tell me fair with me. Mickey, you know where we'll be. You know where we'll be. You know where. I've worked with you for how long now? You know how I've worked. You know how I've operated. I've always been fair with anybody. They say he's transporting. Yeah. So.
All right, Bubs. Sorry. Whoops. Oops. We got shut down. I had a better offer. Sorry. I'm going to jump off here, and I'm going to jump on to uncivil law, and have a chat with him while he's waiting to speak with Auntie Bev. Ah! God, I look like death. Holy crap. I think I'm going to pee my pants. All right. Well, I haven't got it. Actually, where's the link? Link. Can I? I can try. Yes. Hang on. Edit. Customize. Redirect. Come on. Redirect. Okay. Auntie Deb. Nope. He's live already, so he must be finishing off his show and then going to Kurt. But Kurt's not up. And there's 300 of Christine Fortunato's on there. I can't do it. I can send you over to Auntie Deb, but that's it. He might be able to port you across. Sorry. All right. Gotta go. Woo. Wish me luck. Bye.
Hey there, thanks for stopping in. We hope you will join us again. We all look forward to next time. We get to talk about true crime. Clues. Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule and the defense rests. Our true crime family is great. All types of topics we debate. Smash that like and ring that bell. Hit subscribe, you might as well.